Welcome everybody to the latest Strawberry Seed free webinar, Parental Leave, Your Frequently Asked Questions Answered. My name is Carli Saw and I am the Director of Strawberry Seed Consulting, and I will be presenting for you today. I would like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all meeting from today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that may be with us today. So for those that are not familiar with us, who are we? We're Strawberry Seed Consulting. You'll see a couple of new faces have been added to the team recently. And, you know, we've been able to get some new photos done for a few of us. So this is my gorgeous team. We are a boutique HR consulting firm and we help small businesses all around Australia with their HR, everything from hiring and firing and anything that happens in between, really. I'd like to take a moment to welcome Mel Kizzy to our team. She's up there on the top right-hand side. And Allo, who's been an intern with us for the first half of this year, has now officially joined us to job share the HR assistant role with Molly. So, you know, unfortunately, we've had Kylie leave us. She's gone on to start her own business in a totally different field, and we wish her all the best. But, you know, we're onwards and upwards and just continuing to grow, which is fantastic. So today I am going to talk about parental leave, which is obvious from the title. As we go through things, if you do have any questions as we go along, please let me know and just write them in the Q&A section, and I'll be really happy to answer them all at the end. Today, I'm going to start off by talking through some of the legalities around parental leave, but then I'm going to get into sort of some more advice-based things that we can raise and things that you might want to consider. So I think the majority of businesses do want to be best practice as much as they can, and not just comply with their legal obligations. Obviously, that's the bare minimum that we'd like, but there are also a number of ways that we want to be best practice, because being best practice, particularly in an area of parental leave, can help you attract the right staff. It can help you keep those staff, particularly if people feel supported. And it can also make a much smoother transition when people are heading off onto parental leave and returning from parental leave, which can actually not just help those employees that are on parental leave, but it actually also helps the other employees within your business. And, you know, it's a tough market out there at the moment, and particularly in some industries that are very much female-led industries. Parental leave is becoming a little bit of a topic where benefits in that area can really attract and also retain great employees. So, as I always do, I want to start with the laws. So parental leave is governed by the National Employment Standards, which are the 10 commandments of the Fair Work Act, and which sets the minimum standards for every employee in Australia. So parental leave is covered in the NES. And a lot of the legal things we'll talk about are covered in the NES. There has been quite a few changes in the last sort of 12 to 18 months that have changed a few things. It's been an evolving legislation. It hasn't just been set and forget. And certainly, as I said, there's been recent changes as well. Generally, most industrial instruments do refer just back to the NES when it comes to parental leave. And most, certainly employment agreements or, you know, employment contracts, things like enterprise level agreements, most of them do stick with what is the minimum under law, though you may find some contracts and you may find some industrial agreements or enterprise agreements may offer additional benefits to employees in the area of parental leave. So you do always want to check those. But for the majority of us, I think the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards is where we'll be sitting. So what actually is parental leave? Well, the first thing I want to say is it's not called maternity leave anymore. We still get people saying, I've got someone going on maternity leave. Parental leave is no longer defined as being maternity leave. Parental leave is offered to parents when a child is born or adopted. And that's parents, male or female, or, you know, however you identify. Any employee can access parental leave after the employee gives birth, their spouse or de facto partner gives birth, or they adopt a child under 16 years of age. And all employees that are permanent employees are entitled to up to 12 months of unpaid parental leave and may also request to extend that by a further 12 months to a total of 24 months. So as I said, all employees in Australia are entitled to unpaid parental leave. So to qualify, you must have worked for your employer for at least 12 months. And that's 12 months before the date or expected date of birth, if it's an employee who's pregnant, before the date of the adoption, or when the leave starts. So if the leave is taken after another person takes care of the child, because parents can split parental leave now. It doesn't have to just be one person who takes it. You may have one parent takes it for 12 months and another parent takes for 12 months up to a total of 24 months. So, but to legally qualify for unpaid parental leave, then you must have that 12 months of service, and you must be the person with the sole responsibility. You must be the primary caregiver. So both parents, can't both just take the whole first year off. Though, you can in some instances, because some employers will allow it, but generally speaking, it's the primary caregiver. Casual employees will also be eligible for unpaid parental leave if they've been working for their employer on a regular and systematic basis for at least 12 months, and that there would be a reasonable expectation of their continuing to work with the employer on a regular or systematic basis had it not been for them for the birth of the child or adoption of a child. And I think it's important to define what, it's eligibility to be absent from work. So it's a different type of entitlement, because you're basically, a parental leave is about you having your job protected and being allowed to take a period of time, either up 12 months or extended to 24 months, and be absent of work and have your job protected. So that is what it is. It's not, we'll get into what the government paid leave is in a moment, but it's important to think about it. It is an entitlement that an employee has to be absent from work and have their job protected. So as I mentioned, 12 months of unpaid parental leave is the most common, though every employee has the right to request an additional 12 months to make it up to a total of 12 months. Now, as I said right at the beginning, it's not maternity leave anymore, it's parental leave. It applies to parents, but there are some special conditions that do apply to pregnant employees. So if the employee is actually a pregnant employee, their parental leave, unpaid parental leave, may start from 6 weeks before the birth, but ceases no later than 24 months after either the birth or the placement of a child. So what sort of notice do you need to give, or do employees need to give to you? So generally speaking, legally, they do not have to officially tell you that they're going on parental leave, or they will require parental leave, until 10 weeks before the leave. They need to provide you written notice with their intended start and finish dates. Now, the majority of people are going to tell you pretty early on. Most employees, I find, usually around the 3-month mark, will generally let you know that they're either pregnant, or maybe their partner's pregnant, or maybe they're thinking about adoption, and that they will, ideally, the sooner they tell you, the better, because you both have lots of time to plan. But legally, they don't really have to officially tell you until 10 weeks before. So it is a good idea, sort of that 10 weeks before, if they haven't already put it in writing to you, to ask your employer, hey, can you officially just put in an application letting me know that I intend to take my unpaid parental leave? And it says intended start and finish dates, because unless you've got a planned C-section, and even then, or it's an adoption where you know specifically what date that the child will be placed with you, let's be honest, babies do not always come on time. Sometimes they're late, sometimes they're early. So quite often it's more of a loose moving date that starts once the baby is actually born. And so 4 weeks before, they need to actually confirm those dates a little bit better, as much as they can. So let you know if there's any changes, let you know. But ideally, you're having a conversation all the way through the pregnancy, which we'll talk about. But ultimately, about 4 weeks before, it'd be nice to have a fairly good idea, so you can be planning around that employee not being in the office at that particular time. And employers can request evidence. You can ask for a letter from the doctor of the expected due date. Look, that's completely up to you. I don't, It depends on the business you're in and your sort of environment you work in. And look, it may be something that you'd like a doctor to confirm what they think the intended date is. Personally, I've had 3 children and every single one of them has arrived smack bang between when the doctor thought they were going to arrive and when I'd calculated their date. So it's an art, not a science necessarily, to calculate the exact date a baby's going to arrive. And of course, we'll talk about premature birth and other things as well. But you can ask a doctor to provide a note on when they believe the intended due date is. And that might be quite relevant if you're in an environment where you might be considering safe work, which we'll also be talking about. So if you've got someone that is currently on parental leave, they can request to extend it by another 12 months or up to another 12 months. Now, the law states that an employee must give you at least 4 weeks notice before the end of the current leave period they're on. So if you have an employee, they're on parental leave, they're due to come back on the 1st of October, you'd want to be asking them by the beginning of September what their intentions are, and if their intention is to extend that leave, asking them to put a request in writing. It may be rejected on reasonable business grounds, but you have to be able to demonstrate that you have discussed with the employee what the options available are. You've talked to them about, what their thinking is, why they want to do it, and you've really genuinely considered it, because we'll talk about the risks a little bit towards the end. But, it's very difficult for a business to justify not allowing someone to take another 12 months, because it can be doable. So it has to be a very, very solid reason. And look, I don't think I've come across personally, in my experience, anyone who has actually rejected it. That's not to say that it hasn't happened, but personally, I haven't come across anyone that has. And look, obviously there's questions around, what's feasible for the business and things like that. But, if you've been able to cover 12 months, it's very difficult to argue that you wouldn't be able to cover 24. And as an employer, once someone puts that request to you in writing, you do have 21 days to respond. So that's generally when an employee makes a formal request to you, that's generally the standard of 21 days to respond in writing. So we now have something called flexible parental leave. There's been some different names of it over the time, but now it used to be, not that long ago, that when you took parental leave, it has to be a fixed amount from this date to this date, and there was no flexibility. That has changed. So employees currently, now I didn't update this slide because it's now gone to 110 days from the 1st of July, so my apologies. Employees can take up to 110 days of flexible parental leave during the 24-month period after the birth or the date of placement. So it can be taken as a single continuous period of 1 or more days, or separate periods of more than 1 or more days. So look, some people might just say, I want it from this date to this date, but there's flexibility in it now. So employees can request to take it. They might request to take 6 months unpaid parental leave, and then maybe they want to return back to work in a more staggered way and continue to maybe only work part-time and use some of the unpaid parental leave to do that. Or they can use it, as their child, anyone who's got a child who's in their first year of childcare knows that there are many times when, things happen. Children get sick a lot in their first year of childcare. So it may be that there's, times where you need to take other time off. And this allows employees, whether they're, whichever parent they are, it doesn't matter, to be flexible in how they take things. I did hear something the other day about a father who is and a mother who for the first year, the mother stayed home. And then in the second year, both parents are taking 1 day a week each of unpaid parental leave. And so the child's only doing 3 days a week of childcare. And then the parents are taking a day each from their full-time work of parental leave for that second year. So, there's the idea is that it's now flexible, and that, as long as it comes out of the overall entitlement. So it's not an additional, and as I said, it went up to 110 days from the 1st of July. So my apologies, I didn't update that previous slide. But it comes out of the same amount. So if you're entitled to 12 months in the first instance, that's 110 days of flexibility within that 12-month period, that 12-month allocation, or if you extend it the the 24-month allocation. So a pregnant employee may take flexible unpaid parental leave during the 6-week period before the expected birth of the child. And we'll talk about sort of leading up to parental leave in a moment. And, you know, as I said, it comes out of that entitlement, and that, you know, those days are going to go up over the next 2 Julys. So it's going to go up to 120 days that can be flexible next year. And the year after, it's going to go up to 130 days. So it just gives a little bit more flexibility for employers and employees in how someone takes their leave. They may not just take all the first 12 months. I've certainly had a couple of my team who, after they've finished their first 6 months, have staggered back into work and sort of taken flexible parental leave for the next sort of 6-month period, rather than just coming back immediately to their previous job. Now, there is a return to work guarantee. And that means that employees have a lawful right to return to their former position after completing their 12 months or 24 months of unpaid parental leave. So essentially what that means is that you have to offer someone either the same job, or if that position no longer exists, the right to a job of the same status and the same pay as was there when they went on parental leave. So their job is there for them to return to. Now, this can be tricky. If the last sort of 4 years have taught us anything, it's that things can change really quickly. And so, look, in the same way that, you know, I have employers that get a little bit panicked when someone comes to them and says, hey, I'm pregnant, or I'm going on parental leave in 7 months' time or 6 months' time. Like, oh, what do I do? And, you know, what if they want to come back part-time, or what if they want to come back flexibly, or how long are they going to take? I'm like, you're worrying about things that are a long way away, and a lot of things can change in that time. So when someone goes on parental leave, it is very common for you to either to put someone on in a temporary fixed term contract to replace them. If not, you do need to realise that they will return back to your head count once they return from parental leave. If during the period that they are on parental leave, that job now no longer exists, there's been a restructure, there's been, you know, things that have changed, then you at least have to find them a job that is the same status and the same pay. And that's part of the discussions you have about someone returning to work. I will point out here that employees are definitely obligated to consult with employees regarding any changes in their job if they're on parental leave. So in the same way that you are obliged legally to have consultation and discussions with an employee that isn't on parental leave, if there are changes being made to the structure of a business and what roles are there, and we talked about that a lot in our redundancy and restructure webinar not that long ago. But you do have to do the same thing. So if you've got an employee that's on parental leave and there are changes being made within the organisation that will affect their position, that would have been the expectation they came back to, you need to consult with them during the process and ensure that they're aware of what those changes are. So pregnant employees do have a couple of extra parts to parental leave. One of the additional things that they're entitled to is unpaid special maternity leave. So this applies when there's a pregnancy-related illness or a loss of an unborn child after 12 weeks. And that special maternity leave entitlement, and again, this is an unpaid leave entitlement, doesn't actually affect the 12-month parental leave entitlement. So it doesn't come out of that. And the other entitlement that applies to pregnant employees, as opposed to just generally parental leave, is the no safe job leave. So and I'll talk about safe jobs in a minute, but if the employee's job poses a risk to their pregnancy, they're either got to be transferred to a safe job, or if there is absolutely no safe job available, they are entitled to unpaid no safe job leave, which also doesn't impact that 12-month parental leave. Now, just a bit of a trigger warning. I am, because I know this is a really sensitive area for a lot of people, because, one of the things that is covered in the legislation are some requirements around miscarriage, stillbirth, premature birth, or infant death. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but if an employee's baby is stillborn or the child dies within the first 24 months of life, they are still entitled to take up to 12 months of unpaid parental leave. So that's still an entitlement that is there. If, for example, in this case of someone is stillborn, employees may come to their employer with 4 weeks notice and cancel their unpaid parental leave. So if they don't want to take the parental leave that was previously approved with 4 weeks notice, they can cancel that leave. And compassionate leave is also available, paid compassionate leave in the event of a miscarriage. The other thing that comes up sometimes is premature birth, because babies don't always come on time and sometimes they come early. We had a client not too long ago, I think it was in the last year or two, who had her baby 8 weeks premature. And she decided she still wanted to work while the baby was in hospital. She didn't, and the employer came to us and said, "What do we do?" And I said, "Well, it ultimately the employee can request to put their parental leave on hold until after the baby comes home." And in those circumstances, I think you've got to communicate and you've got to work with the employee. So in this instance, we suggested, if she's adamant that that's what she wants to do and that's how she's going to cope in the situation, and you have work that she will be able to do in that situation, then, you can absolutely do that. In this instance, with this employee, they allowed her to sort of work as much as she could, and she was in a role that allowed her to do that. But they made sure that she was working on things that if it wasn't coping or it wasn't working out, that she could just at any time say, "No, this is not working for me anymore." But these are quite specific areas, and I would generally suggest that you get advice in those instances, like that client did, reaching out to us, because they don't happen very often, but when they do, they're quite sensitive, and you want to make sure that not only are you legally doing the right thing, but ethically as well. So another one that can come up depending on your industry is about, as I mentioned, safe jobs. So all pregnant employees, including casuals, are entitled to be moved to a safe job if it isn't safe for them to do their usual job. And that includes employees who are in their first 12 months that may not be actually eligible for unpaid parental leave. So, the majority of people who are having a baby can keep doing their same job in the same way with no issues. But there may be a requirement to change some parts of someone's job or stop doing certain things to make the job safe. Now, there is an example I was looking at in some of my research that said, if you had someone that worked in a chemical factory, the doctor might say, "Look, it's not safe for the employee to be working with those chemicals in that close proximity during pregnancy." So you're legally required to explore another job that might be safer for that employee. So some of the things that you might need to think about changing would be the specific duties. So say, for example, there's a lot of lifting, or as I said, there's, exposure to chemicals. You may need to change some of their duties. Might be hours of work, and again, a lot of these should be based on medical advice. So you're not just, making assumptions, you're not basing it just on what the employee wants to do, but if there is any concerns, then you need to be writing to and relying on information from the medical practitioner on what is safe and isn't. And it could be even things like, travel arrangements or the work environment. There might be someone who usually flies somewhere once a week. Well, the further they go into their pregnancy, the less likely that's probably going to be viable. So, it's about communicating and coming up with ways to make it safer. Other things that might need to change, some of the examples there, if you have to climb a lot of stairs, you work in a hot environment, working with animals, as I said, pesticides or lifting heavy things, working in a facility where there's not toilets close by. Some of those things might come into play for someone, and depending on their pregnancy. So it's important to always be communicating with your employee, and if there are any concerns, seek medical advice to make sure you're doing the right thing. So we've covered this in at least one or two of our previous webinars, but an employee, including a casual who is returning from work from parental leave, does have a right to request a change in working arrangements if they're responsible for caring for a child no older than school age. So that is part of the flexible work requirements under Fair Work, and these also changed in the last sort of 18 months. So an employer may make requests such as returning to work on a part-time basis, or it may be to finish work earlier, or to pick up kids from school and things like that. Now, again, an employee who would like to make that request must put it in writing, and the employer must respond within 21 days. And any refusal of that request, it must be set out in the response of why that's been refused. Now, I'm going to touch a couple of areas that could be seen as grounds for refusal. and particularly if you're a small business, it might be harder for you to accommodate some of the things that an employee might ask for. So if there's an excessive cost for accommodating the request, the larger the business is, the more likely you would have to wear that cost. Where there's no capacity to reorganise the work arrangements of other employees to accommodate that request. If there's an impracticality of the arrangement, so for example, you'd have to bring in additional staff to make it work. There'd be a significant loss of efficiency or productivity, or there would be a significant impact on customer service. So there's some of the grounds, but they really need to be based on the business. They can't just be, it's not your preference that someone works less hours. And look, again, the pandemic has taught us that flexible work is really possible for a lot of people. Working from home is possible for a lot of people. So, for example, if someone requested that they work from home 1 day a week and they're in a job that is absolutely practical for that to happen, there's no reason why, you'd have to, have a really strong reason to reject it. And it can't just be it's not your preference, because you'd have to be really showing a significant business reason to say no. And now that's not to say that working from home is an alternative for childcare, because it's not. You can't be in the primary care of an infant and working. That's not an expectation. But it is not unreasonable for someone to ask to maybe finish earlier or start later, while their children are young, and that's when they've got the right to do it. And you need to be very careful about how you respond to those requests if you're not going to say yes. Now, I will also point out, though, you do not have to say yes to everything. It's a two-way conversation. So if an employee who is returning from parental leave says, hey, I don't want to come back in the same full-time capacity I was in, I'd like to come back as a part-time capacity, ask them to put in writing to you what their request is. And then you know what you're working with. So say, okay, put in writing to me what your request is, say the employee comes back and says, I only want to work 2 days a week. Now, then you can go away and say, what works for the business? Now, you don't have to just say yes to the 2 days a week. Or maybe, they say 3 days a week and I want to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Now, it might work for you to have them 3 days a week, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday does not work for you for many reasons. It could be it doesn't work in with how other employees work, or many other valid reasons. You can go back and have a conversation with the employee and say, hey, we're happy for 3 days a week, but the 3 days a week would have to be this, this, and this for us to make that work. Or if, there's instances where employees say, I only want to come back 1 day a week. And for some jobs, that's not feasible. It's just actually not financially viable for an employer to have someone 1 day a week. So it's within their right to say, well, look, we cannot, 1 day a week is not financially viable for us for these reasons. However, we could do 3 half days a week would be financially viable for us for these reasons, or whatever it might be. So the important thing, I think, is to just not have a blanket no, to genuinely consider what they're asking and if it can work. And that has to be a two-way conversation, and two-way. It might be a bit of give and take from both parties. And so, the risks of just flat out refusing without valid reasons are an unfair dismissal claim, because you could have someone that resigns because you don't actually accommodate what they're asking for. And if you can't demonstrate that you've reasonably tried to come to a solution with them, and that you have considered, and it is based on a reasonable business request or a business reason, and they resign, they can then put in a constructive dismissal claim to say, well, you actually gave them no choice. So you want to be able to demonstrate that you have considered it and that you've tried to negotiate something that works for both parties. And the other one's an adverse action claim or a general protections claim, which can come about on the basis of discrimination. So you cannot discriminate against someone purely because they have got children or family responsibilities, or they're pregnant. So you've got to be really careful that you don't make decisions on anything other than business needs. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to be the same for everyone, because the decision you make about an employee, right, that what works for your business right now may not work for your business in 12 months' time. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. So it's no good trying to have those conversations with an employee when they start their parental leave, because first of all, if it's their first baby, they have no idea what they're going to get. When I had my first baby, my boss said to me, I said, I'll be back in 6 months. And she's like, maybe you will, but maybe you won't. Maybe you'll get a baby who, doesn't sleep and doesn't do all the things that you hope that they do. So she compromised. She put someone on a 6-month contract to replace me with an option of another 6 months. And we talked to each other through the process. And I did come back after 6 months because I was 25 and I couldn't wait to get back to work. And my daughter's father was going to be looking after her. But, things can change in that time. And just because you've said yes to one employee about it, because it worked for the business at that time, doesn't mean you're obliged to do it for every employee either. It has to be based on the mix of staffing and the business needs at that particular time. So it is really important that you look at it on a case-by-case basis, and that any decisions you make are not based on just the fact that you don't want to do it, but they're based on business reasons. And we would really highly recommend that you talk to us if you are thinking about maybe saying no, or maybe negotiating with the employee. We get a lot of phone calls around this, and we're about to start talking about some of the things that you can do when someone is on parental leave, and keeping in touch about these kind of issues is one of them. So some of the frequently asked questions that we get, and also some of the ones that were asked in the questions that everyone that's registered for today's webinar has asked. So the first one is, can an employee be required to take parental leave early? So 6 weeks before the expected date is generally the accepted time. Now, it's going to depend on the person. So there might be someone who, due to pregnancy, illness, or medical things, might have to start earlier and get that special unpaid leave if they're pregnant and they physically cannot work in that prior to the 6 weeks before. But I've had almost all of my employees, bar one, has worked past the 6-week mark. And that was just a discussion and a negotiation. So depending on the type of work you do, you may want to ensure you're basing it on medical advice. So if it's more of a physical job, I would highly recommend that the doctor provides a medical certificate to state that the employee is fine to continue to work after that 6 weeks time. Look, we're an office-based business. People can work from home. For my team, I just sort of said to them, you can work right up to the day. In fact, one of my team basically worked up until the day she went on, she actually had the baby. She was able to do that. The type of work she was doing was in the background. We made sure nothing she was working on, someone else couldn't immediately take over if needed. Some of my team have just kind of eased down and eased out of work. So, they've dropped down their hours a little bit for the last couple of weeks. But it depends on the person. Some people, I was going insane. I got made to finish work 6 weeks before I had my first child 25 years ago. And I kept going into work to have lunch, and they kept saying, why are you here? I'm like, you made me leave. I'm bored. I've washed every cushion cover in the house. Now, it's different for everybody. Everyone is different. So I think it's about the nature of the work, the type of work they do, and talking to them and what their preference is. But it's perfectly fine for an employee to work as close to the due date as they want, as long as it's medically safe to do so, and you are within your requirements to check that with a doctor. I sort of touched on this before. So if an employee on parental leave return early in the event of a stillbirth or an infant death. So as I mentioned, if a pregnant employee loses their child after parental leave starts, she can give her employer 4 weeks notice of intention to return to work, or either parent is taking the intention to return to work. If they don't give that notice of that intention, then they are entitled to take their entire agreed period, but the employer is not able to request that the employee returns to work. So whilst the employee can give you 4 weeks notice and say, hey, listen, I'm ready to come back to work, I want to come back to work early, that is absolutely within their right to do so. You as the employer cannot go to them and say, hey, you don't need this parental leave now, you've got to return to work. And I hope no one would do that anyway. Does an employee accrue annual and personal leave whilst on parental leave? No, they don't. Employees are not accruing annual or personal leave while they're on unpaid parental leave. And that includes when the employee is receiving the paid parental leave scheme from the government. So they're not actually accruing that leave while they're on unpaid parental leave. But can they take other forms of leave whilst on parental leave? That's a common question we get. So an employee can take annual leave or jury service leave, and that won't affect the length of the parental leave. So, if an employee has some accrued leave, look, what most people tend to do if an employee wants to take some annual leave during their parental leave, most of my team have done this. They've chosen to use paid annual leave as the first period of time when they finish work, and then their unpaid parental leave started from that time. So they were paid. They can be taken concurrently though, so you can be on unpaid parental leave, but choose to be paid your annual leave or your long service leave at the same time. Now, there are regulations around the government paid parental leave scheme. So I don't want to say too much about that, because that is a question that an employee needs to speak to Services Australia on that basis. But certainly it's very common for an employee to take annual leave or long service leave. I won't say whether or not an employee accrues long service leave on parental leave though, because that will depend on your state. So in Victoria, you do continue to accrue long service leave because during parental leave, because unpaid parental leave is counted as service, but that does not apply in every state. So that is a state-by-state question, and is something you need to check for your particular employee. More comes into play when it comes time to work out how much long service leave an employee is entitled to. And so you need to understand that at the time, but that is very much state-based. Can both parents take parental leave at the same time? Absolutely. Just you don't have to be at the same employer. Parents are each entitled to 12 months of unpaid parental leave. There's no limit on the amount of time they can take at the same time. That's a change that also recently has come into play. It used to be a set amount of time that the other parent could take at the same time, but now they could both take the full 12 months if they wanted to. And both of them can also extend or request to extend for a further 12 months without impacting the other employees. So it used to be really messy when they first brought it in, because it could be that both parents could share the leave, but you had to almost talk to the other person's employer to make sure they weren't taking it at the same time and things like that. Whereas now that's all gone out the window. Both of them are entitled to up to 2 years, as long as their leave ceases no later than 24 months after the birth or placement of the child. And as I mentioned earlier, the flexible leave is also in there as well. So there could be a combination of taking some of it flexibly and some of it for set periods. So I'm only going to briefly touch on the government-funded parental leave scheme, mainly because it is covered by Services Australia. And so it's not something under the Fair Work Act, which is our expertise. And it changes a lot. It changes, on a regular basis, things change with it. But basically, the parental leave pay scheme, PLP, is provided for working parents at the national minimum wage. So both the primary carer and their partner, including same-sex partners, can access this payment if they meet the eligibility criteria, and that is set by Services Australia. So it's eligible. Any eligible employees can receive a payment during their leave. And it doesn't extend the period of unpaid leave or affect parental leave under the Fair Work Act at all. So the entitlement under the Fair Work Act is unpaid parental leave. This is a benefit that the employee can access through the government. They have to apply for it through Services Australia. It is paid, in the majority of cases, it is paid via the employer. So what happens is that the first time you have an employee, I'll be honest with you, it's a terrible system, like most government systems are, but through Services Australia, you have to go in and set yourself up as an organisation to be able to pay parental leave through you. And the first time you do that was an absolute nightmare for me. And I'm pretty savvy with IT, but it wasn't easy. But so please ring the helpline if you have any problems the first time you do it. But once you're set up, you're set up. And what happens is the employee goes and applies for it. And if they are eligible and they're going to receive it, then you get a letter from Services Australia that tells you to go in and you accept, and you basically acknowledge, yes, this employee works for you. This is when they work. This is what the hours were, etc. And that, yes, they will receive it. And basically what happens is the government puts the money in the account before, and you pay it through your payroll. So you're not out of pocket at all. It's just paid to you. It's in your bank account, and then you do it through your normal payroll, and your bookkeeper or accountant can help you set that up. It is capped at a certain number of days or weeks, depending on the personal circumstances. Employees can split it into different periods and things like that too. So again, be guided by what the government sends you and tells you. Once that initial administration is set up, it's actually pretty easy once you've set up once. The first one was the hardest. After that, it's just as simple as going in and remembering your password and going into your Services Australia account and getting it set up. So what are some of the other things that employers can do? So this is when we're getting outside the law a little bit and we're getting more into those sort of bonus things that an employer can offer. So there's lots of things that you can offer either during pregnancy or when someone returns from parental leave. Um, so if you've got a pregnant employee, you might say offer them parking close to the building. You might be able to offer a car park during their pregnancy so they don't have to walk as far to the office, or you might be able to offer them to work from home, particularly towards the end of their pregnancy. You might be able to offer benefits such as paying normal wages during some or all their leave. So this is where, an employer there's an unpaid parental leave entitlement. There is a government paid parental leave entitlement, but some employers do offer as a benefit to their employees. It might be a certain number of days or weeks, or it could be topping up to what their previous wage was, because the government scheme is the minimum wage. So there are some employers that do, for example, top up an employer's wage to what they previously got, 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, as a benefit. Or they might just offer a flat 4 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever they like. It's a benefit. You can make that choice, parental leave, as part of someone's benefits. And we're certainly seeing this happening a lot with some of our employers in female dominated industries. We work with a lot of speech pathologists and psychologists, and they tend to be more female dominated industries. And we have some clients that are doing things like, once someone has completed 2 years of service, they get 4 weeks or 6 weeks paid parental leave as a benefit. So, because for them, that's about not just attracting people and standing out from other employers, but also actually retaining them. Because if you've got an employee who's of a age where they're considering starting a family, and they enjoy working for you, and maybe other job offers come their way, it could be quite a good incentive for them to stay with you if they know that once they've followed that 2 years that they're going to get that additional pay that they wouldn't get at another employer. So again, these are bonuses or benefits, but they're things to think about. Giving an employee the option of taking annual leave or long service leave at half pay during parental leave. So rather than taking it at full pay, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Giving them the option of not taking like all their annual leave at once, but taking it at half pay, so they're still getting a wage during a period of their parental leave. Paying some employers, because superannuation is not paid on the parental leave. So some employers are actually continuing to contribute to superannuation or continuing to allow employers to accrue annual leave during that time. Again, these are benefits. Allowing an employee with less than 12 months service to take parental leave and still hold their job. Again, it's not a legal requirement. I fell pregnant unexpectedly not long after starting a new job, and so I actually just missed out on the 12 months, but my employer never once questioned it. They just said, well, we'll treat you like any other employee. Technically they could have not held my job, but they did. And I was really appreciative of that. Again, if you've got a great employee, you're going to want to keep them. And some of these are just ideas that might be worthwhile thinking about for your own policies to ensure that you are offering best practice and maybe retaining and attracting great employees. And a lot can still let their employees access benefits like company car or study that they were paying for, or mobile phones or internet, things like benefits they were usually paid for. A lot of employers will continue to pay that. Now, obviously there's costs involved here, and obviously not every business, particularly small business, can afford to do that. But there may be bits and pieces that you can take, and things like, giving someone a car park, for the last half of their pregnancy, so they don't have to park, a kilometre away and walk up to the office, can be something that's really appreciated and will make an employee a lot more loyal and more likely to stay and want to come back. Another thing that I highly recommend is train your managers, because as a business owner, you may not be the person that someone tells. In a small business, you may. But if you've got a management team, make sure those managers understand your policies. Make sure they understand the laws. Make sure they know how to respond when someone comes to them and says, hey, I'm pregnant. make sure they understand what employees' rights are, because I have seen many instances across my career where it's not the organization themselves, it's one particular manager who has their own views on whether on parental leave, whatever they may be, and says something to an employee that's discriminatory, says, oh, well, you're going to have to leave your job, oh, we won't be able to have a job for you, or makes a comment that can cause a lot of issues with a great employee. And legal issues. So make sure that they understand what they should say. And in fact, the most important thing is for them to understand going, congratulations, I'm so happy for you. You know, we'll discuss what that means work-wise over time, but congratulations should be the first thing that you say to someone that tells you that they're going to be a parent. But I really would like employees that have a leadership team to think about that and make sure they have clear policies, and that or anyone that may end up having a conversation with an employee understands how to have it and what they can and can't say, or should and shouldn't say. Another thing that I thought was important to touch on was, the replacing employees who are on unpaid parental leave. So, the great thing about an employee coming to you and saying, hey, in 6 months' time, I'm going to be taking leave, is you've got plenty of time to plan for that. I once was speaking to one of our clients who was in a trade-based business, and they were recruiting for a role, an administration type role, and they had a number of applicants that were sort of in their mid to late 20s and were female, and they sort of said, I have a cone of silence kind of situation. And I said to them, they said, oh, their concern was that they'd put them on and they might end up taking parental leave. And I said, well, I can understand your concern there. But having said that, you just had a male employee come in and give you a week's notice that they were resigning and moving to Sydney with their girlfriend. Is that a better situation, or someone coming to you and saying in 6 months' time, I'm going to be away for 12 months, and you've got 6 months to plan for that, think about what that's going to look like, to hire someone in, to have them train someone, to have them do a handover. And hey, if you're in a growing business, you might end up with 2 great employees, because the person that you brought in to replace them during their parental leave wants to stay on, and then you've got another employee coming back. And again, businesses grow and they change, and you don't know what the circumstances are going to be, in 18 months' time when this person returns from parental leave. So plan ahead to what you think you might need, can have continuing discussions. So think about business continuity. What is it that we're going to need to have in place? Do we need a like-for-like replacement? So that might be that you put somebody on a fixed term contract, which you can absolutely do. And you can, a parental leave fixed term contract for 12 months is really common, where you actually advertise it as this is a 12-month parental leave coverage. That person comes in for 12 months. And then as you're having conversations with a returning employee, if they're coming back part-time, maybe there's an option for them to job share, or maybe you have enough work for 2 people. They're not decisions that need to be made at the beginning, but then you've got that person on board for that period of time. So it's really about you, for your specific business, thinking about what you're going to need. Now, if you have a business where you might have 9 people doing the same job, it might be a lot easier for you to bring people in and out, as opposed to someone who is a skill set that you have a one-off in your business. So it is business to business, it is position to position, but you've got plenty of time to plan and think about it. And, you don't have to make rash decisions, and talk to the employee. They might have some great suggestions. They might say, listen, based on what's been happening in the business, there's probably 3 people that could take on aspects of my role, and maybe you don't need to replace me. Certainly when I had my second child, I was working for a joint venture and it didn't get renewed. So I pretty much well-timed my role with the joint venture at the time the joint venture was finishing, and sort of saw it out to the end, and, that worked for both of us. So I think it's important to, case-by-case basis, don't panic, start to think about it, start to have conversations, but you have time. What are some other things that employers can do to support during parental leave? So as you lead up to parental leave, it's really good to have conversations, just communicate. I can't emphasize how important communication is. Talk to your employees. What are their expectations and preferences regarding contact? Say to them, hey, I'd love to keep in touch with you. Do you want us to still invite you to team meetings that we have once a quarter? Or do you just, are you not interested? Like, are you happy for us to keep you in the loop on a few things? Or do you want to have zero contact? start to plan with them about how they will do handover and what that looks like. Get them really involved with it so that they, and ideally, because you've got plenty of time to recruit, you can find someone before they leave to be able to hand over to. But have those conversations with someone before they go off on leave. Often a great idea is a buddy system. So having another employee that they work with regularly, and they know really well, to be someone that is their contact while they're on parental leave. It could be their manager, it could be the business owner, but just keeps in contact, maybe keeps them across things that are happening in the business and things like that. Make sure that they're still on an email. Say to them, hey, do you want to still access your work email? And you can check it whenever you want, more to keep up to date with what's happening. If you use Slack, they might still have access to the Slack groups. They can jump in and have chats with people when they want to. Again, it's checking with them what their preference is. And events. The amount of times that I've been HR manager in large organizations or small organizations, we get to the Christmas party, I'm like, has anybody invited the people on parental leave? They're still employees. Invite them to the catch-ups, invite them to training days. I did a policy training with one of our clients. We had a newborn baby in the room and I was very excited because I got to get cuddles. I ran a leadership in-house training for one of our clients a couple of months back, and one of the directors had their 3-month-old baby in there, and there's some great pictures of me holding that baby during one of the activities that they were doing during the training, because God, I don't think we had a team meeting without a baby in it for probably 3 years at Strawberry Seed. And we just, and most of the time the baby was great. There was one meeting, she came in for it and the baby just was not having it. And she said, I'm just going to go. And we're like, that's absolutely fine. We'll update you, It's about keeping someone involved in work. There was a question I did see from somebody that had registered, and it was about the likelihood of people returning to work. Well, the things that, that's going to be a personal decision for anybody. It really is. It's going to depend on their personal circumstances. But if you continue to maintain that employment relationship, they still feel like part of the team. They feel like they're supported to come back. They're more likely to come back, and they're more likely to continue on and be a great employee. It costs a lot more to replace someone than it does to, maintain a relationship with a great employee. So communicate with them regularly in the lead up to them returning to work. So don't just wait and go, oh, it's 4 weeks till they're due to return. You should be regularly checking in and communicating with them. If you're inviting them in for staff events and lunches and things, that's great. But just keep in contact. Most of my team, because of the way we work, have been able to, once their government paid parental leave has been over, I've had a couple of my team who have just started to transition back into work 1 or 2 days a week when they were ready, just to keep their toe in it. They weren't doing face-to-face client stuff, but they were doing stuff in the background to support. We could offer that kind of work. It kept them involved. It gave them that connection back to work. And it worked really well, but not everybody's going to want to do that. The main thing is you don't make assumptions. Don't assume you know what that person's going to want to do. Start having those conversations. Maybe, 2 months out, say, hey, do you want to come in for a coffee, or can we catch up on a call and really have a discussion about what your thoughts are about returning to work? But you can be having those conversations all the way along. Again, what someone thinks they want before, particularly the first baby, before they have it, can be very different to what they actually find that they want. My first child, I was desperate to come back to work. I was 25 years old. I really wanted to come back to work. I missed work. By the time I had my third child 8 years later, I was really happy to take a full 12 months off, and was not that worried about coming back to work at any time soon. So it'll change for each person and their situation, their financial situation, their family situation. It's become a lot more common to have, if the, mother of the child, in some instances, is in a more high paying job, she might go back to work quite quickly, and the father stays home with the child. Like this is why it's now parental leave. It's not maternity leave, it's parental leave. So, have those discussions, see what's going to work for both parties. When they do come back, if they do want to transition back on with a request of flexible work, as I mentioned earlier, consider all the options. What are the options of them coming back? It may be a transition. They may start small and work their way up. They might do 2 days a week for a period of time, and then 3, and then 4, and increase it over a period of time. What will work for you and for them? They might want to come back full time, they might not, and it might be reliant upon childcare, because childcare access is a really big issue. If you can only get, you might prefer them to work particular days, but if they can only get childcare on other days, you might have to compromise for a period of time, and they are on a waiting list until they get the day that works better for you. So it should be a two-way street. And again, that constant communication just means that everyone's on the same page and no one's making assumptions. And don't forget the practical support. So if you've got an employee, my first child, I returned to work at 6 months, I was still breastfeeding. So I needed to express milk. And luckily I didn't have an employer that thought that I should do that in the toilet, which I've seen happen before. That was 25 years ago. So I was very lucky back then. But, do they need a safe space to breastfeed or express milk, and somewhere to keep it that's private? That's a practical support, but there could be many other practical supports that you could put in place. Maybe they do need to, initially work from home from a period of time, and you can assist them to do that. Just again, all those things that you should be discussing with your employee before they return. So my final thoughts, before I open it up for questions: don't be afraid of it. Parental leave is not a scary thing. I think the other thing I'd like to mention is, quite often when there's a performance issue with a pregnant employee, or that we do sometimes get employees that are quite scared to deal with it because they don't want to be seen as discriminatory. And it comes back to, as long as whatever you're managing or dealing with your employee is the same, that you wouldn't do it any differently if they weren't pregnant, then just go ahead. You're not discriminating against them. You don't have to tiptoe around someone who is having a baby. You should treat them exactly the same way you would treat them if they weren't pregnant. But you just need to be mindful that you're not making decisions based on the fact that they're pregnant or they're on parental leave or they're returning from parental leave. People have babies all the time. And as a society, we have decided, rightfully, in my opinion, that we're going to support people through that. That's how we're going to get our future workforce. And if you're a supportive employer, if you do things, even if you just do the minimum you have to do, if you do it in a thoughtful and supportive way, you are more likely to have employees that do want to return to your workplace, continue to work there, and they'll be quite loyal if you've really supported them. So always keep that in mind. Before we jump to questions, just our next couple of upcoming webinars. In September, we're doing Improving Team Communications. In October, we're doing one of our 101 series for hospitality, restaurants, wineries and distilleries. And then in November, Frances will be taking us through understanding psychological hazards in the workplace. We also have some leadership training coming up. WA is next Monday. You've literally got one more day to do that before I fly out to Perth on the weekend. Sydney, we have got like over 12 people already registered for our September one in Sydney. So if you are interested in our Sydney one, that's filling up really quickly, and we will be capping that out soon. So if you're interested, Sydney's coming up, and then we're doing another one in Victoria in Torquay in November. And again, there's already probably about half a dozen people that have registered for that session. So all the information can be found on our website under training courses with all the booking information. And we do have discount codes. If you're a Strawberry Sea client, get in touch with our HR advisors. We also have some mental health first aid courses coming up. We have a blended online workshop course coming up in September. And we have a blended face-to-face coming up in Melbourne in October as well. And all the details are also on our training courses page. Follow us on all of our socials. We now have TikTok as well, thanks to our Gen Z employees. We have YouTube, where we have all our previous webinars. They're also on our website. And we do put little videos out on our TikTok on lots of different topics as well that you might find useful. But I am going to open it up to questions. So has anyone got any questions that they've put in the Q&A? Let me open up. So far, no questions. Would anyone like to pop any questions in that they would like answered specifically on parental leave or anything else, really? Doesn't look like we're going to get many questions. Look, parental leave can be one of those things that they're very specific issues that do arise. So if you don't have any questions now, we'd always be more than happy to answer any specific questions you have about conditions. Oh, how do you keep in touch when staff don't want to hear from you while on leave? Well, you respect their wishes. You let them know if they've sort of said, hey, I really just want to be far away from work. double check with them that they don't want to, just sort of say, listen, maybe we'll let you know. We'll just send you a quick email. We won't call you, or maybe I'll just send you a quick email, if about the Christmas party or whatever. If you don't want to come, you don't have to come. That's fine. But once you're getting closer to them coming back to work, it's very reasonable for you to reach out and say, hey, we do need to get together and discuss it. But some people don't. It's really their personal preference. So you can't force it upon them. But at least try and agree with them. Look, there will be times we may have to contact you and talk to you. So what's your preference? Would you prefer a text? Would you prefer an email? Would you prefer a phone call? For those times that we do have to contact you, what would you prefer? But you can't really force it on them. Good question, though. And look, that's part of the lead into, if you have a good lead in and you're having good conversations, then that can be really helpful to, make sure that you're able to, have those conversations, and they might be much more open to it. But some people just want to disappear for a while and have a break from work, and that's okay too. I get that. I've had all three different scenarios with my three children, so I think it's a person by person basis. Do we have any other questions that anyone would like to pop in at this time? Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending. We will be popping a copy of this recording. You'll receive an email with a copy of the recording if you'd like to for future reference. It'll also be both on our website and our YouTube channel for you to access at any time. As I mentioned, all of our previous webinars are all on our YouTube and on our website. So, we did one a couple of years ago on all the different types of leave. We did one on personal leave earlier this year. We've done them on flexible work. We've done them on redundancy. We've done them on lots of different topics. So feel free to go back and have a look through them. But as always, the Strawberry Seed team are always happy to answer questions when they come up and try and help you through specific issues. So thank you for those that attended tonight for attending. And we will see you at our next webinar next month. Thank you.